I want to spend a few moments talking about a topic that is near and dear to me. It's near and dear to me because of my background as a research scientist. One of the things that you learn through the scientific method is that the notion of personal stories or anecdotes is an irrelevancy to you. They don't actually mean anything. They might serve as an interesting jumping off point. They might serve as an initial point of contact, that you've observed something, you've seen something, something's caught your eye. But within the grand scheme of making decisions, they're largely irrelevant. So I want to look at the notion of the danger of the narrative fallacy, which could also be titled Monkeys Love a Story. At our heart, we are a storytelling culture. We always have been, since our ancestors first mastered language. Stories tell us about our natural world. They also tell us about the shifts in politics and sentiment within our own social groups. This is probably why gossip is so important to us, because when we lived in small tribal groups, it was necessary to understand all the social nuances of that group, and the easiest way to do that was via gossip. The unfortunate thing with storytelling is it primes us to have an emotional connection to storytelling. We like stories. We find them very, very compelling. The problem with that is it introduces what I call an n=1 problem. The n=1 problem is simply this. Your story, irrespective of what it is about, at its heart is simply a sample of one. A sample of one is irrelevant to us because a sample of one is simply an anecdote. It is a tale. It is a personal experience. That personal experience might be valid to us, but there's no way for us to make certain that it is valid for other people. For example, you might be completely convinced that you've seen Fat Elvis down at your local 7-Eleven. That's your story. There's no way you can convince me that you have done that. However, if you had said to me that you'd seen the real Elvis in 1957 in Tupelo, Mississippi, along with 15,000 other Bobby Soxers, I'd be inclined to believe you. And I'd be inclined to believe you because that satisfies the law of large numbers. There were 15,000 other people there, and there is documentary evidence that this actually occurred. So it is not a story. It's not a tale. The issue that has prompted this little discussion was I was reading an online technology article on disruption within telecommunications. I enjoy reading things that talk about industries being disrupted, particularly by technology, particularly by changes. And the centerpiece of this article was the once godlike Blackberry and how they've fallen from favour. For those who don't know about Blackberry, before smartphones appeared, Blackberries used to be termed crackberries because of people's addiction to using them. They were the uniform tool for your corporate road warrior / wanker. The good thing about reading articles online is that you can track backlinks. You can track the backstory quite easy. And tracking the backstory to this article led me to this quote. And this is from a Bloomberg article which I've referenced in the text for this video, so you can look it up yourself. And it talks about one fund manager and others getting involved in betting on Research in Motion, or RIM, the company who makes Blackberry, somehow believing that this company will recover. Whilst reading the article, I was attempting to work out what possible reason someone might have for this. Then I found this statement. This statement is the rationale for getting involved in trading RIM. And the simple rationale is people like a keyboard and there is a big embedded base. So the company could be worth a lot more. My reading of this is that I like to use a keyboard, therefore everybody else likes to use a keyboard, therefore the company should be worth a lot more because my impression of using a keyboard is true and correct. This to me is an n equals 1 problem. This is a sample of one problem. I actually wanted to find out a bit more about this. I confess I'm not an analyst, I don't pretend to be, but it doesn't take much brains to begin to assemble data and generate an opinion or an idea. So I did a bit of basic Google foo, and I've looked up what data I can find with regard to what's happening in the global smartphone market. This first piece is a briefing piece by Thomson Reuters, and it simply looks at handset manufacturers. And it tells you the story that you think it would tell you. Samsung and Apple make a truckload of phones. In fact, they make most of the phones. Nokia make fewer and fewer phones. But this tells me about headset manufacturers. It doesn't tell me about the operating system, which is the thing that drives these very, very clever pieces of technology. So I found a piece of research by the IDC research group, and I've extracted the main points of the data. It tells us a similar story in terms of operating systems. You can see Android makes the most, and in a rolling calendar year, experienced explosive growth. Apple has dropped off a little bit. Symbian, which is the operating system for Nokia phones, has collapsed. God knows what Windows is doing, and who the hell cares about Linux phones. But the important thing here is looking at RIM. In a single calendar year, their market share has collapsed. It's gone from 11.5% of market to 4.5% of market. So the notion of there being a large embedded base of people who like keyboards is somewhat of an irrelevancy, because their market base has completely collapsed. This brings us back to the issue of needing to look at the law of large numbers. How much data can we get to make an opinion? How much data do we need? This is a long-term chart of RIM going back to the turn of the century. You can see that at its peak, before the GFC really bit, it was worth around about $150 a share. It's now worth 11, which is basically what it was worth in the early part of the century. Price gives us, or fulfills, that notion of the law of large numbers, because what we're seeing is a consensus of opinion. We're seeing what everybody thinks it's worth, not what one person thinks it's worth. Remember, one person's opinion is a sample of one. Everybody's opinion satisfies the law of large numbers. I wanted to have a closer look at the sentiment in RIM, and I asked Metastock just to do a simple thing. Show me the 52-week highs for this company, which it's done. You can see that the last 52-week high for RIM occurred 4 years ago. So in that period from 2008 to 2012, the stock has either been going down or having very small recoveries. It's not making new highs. To me, this is an important indicator of what is actually happening with this stock. It's an important indicator to me of the sentiment surrounding this. Markets are, over time, very, very good at valuing instruments at what they should be valued at. Yes, we do get extremes. You get wild swings. You do get irrational exuberance. But over time, markets are the perfect valuation system. There is a second arm to this story, and I asked Metastock to show me the number of 52-week lows. I have to stress this is not a perfect filter. This is just something to get an indication of what is actually happening with the stock at any given time. And as you can see, in the past 2 to 3 years, the stock has done nothing but make new 52-week lows. So this tells me something about what has happened. It doesn't tell me that it will continue forever. RIM might actually manage to pull one out of the hat and completely obliterate Android and Apple. Although you would think that the chances of that occurring are very, very, very small. The issue here is one of stories. Consider the notion of UFO abduction. In the US, some outrageously large percentage of the population believes they've been abducted by a UFO. Yet no one has ever managed to steal an alien version of a Swiss Army knife from one of them. This is a story, it's an anecdote. It is an n=1 problem. The unfortunate thing about these problems is that stories have currency with us. They have power to communicate ideas and they have power to sway us. So when you either generate an n=1 story for yourself, or you'll hear someone else's n=1 story, you need to be very, very aware of where that story may be coming from.